So this week I had the opportunity to attend the Symposia series at the Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which some buddies of mine and I often attend and have since graduating seminary, even though we didn't go to this seminary. Somehow, and I'm not entirely sure how, this became sort of our annual class reunion. And that's not for the whole class, it's just for a few of us, but it's where we get to catch up, see each other, hear some papers, talk some theology, talk some casuistry, that is, talk about what's going on in our parishes and so forth. But it also then presents an opportunity, because there are a good number of people who come to this thing. It's not the same people every year, but it's sort of a networking ground for Missouri Synod who's who liturgical confessional people. And it's not like it's all that clean and dandy, but that's what it is. And so I had the opportunity this week to try to seek out and grab a couple of interviews. As Project Resurrection has become Project Resurrection, one of the bits of feedback I got from people out there, you out there in listener land, was that I could hold on to that raw idea, especially when applied to the few conversations I'd had, Katie Sherman, Brian Wolfmueller, and maybe pursue that a little bit more. And so that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to try not to throw all of them at you at once. I don't want to give up on Daniel too fast, right? I'm really enjoying that. So I'm going to try to hold these for weeks when I feel like I can't get to Daniel and drop it. But I'm going to drop one this week right away on you. And we're just going to do them in order. I'm not going to be too picky about it. But so the first person I got to sit down and chat with is Pastor David Petersen. If you don't know his name, you probably should. He is at the forefront of liturgical, I don't want to say development's the wrong word, but defense within the Missouri Synod. And we'll talk about that a little bit. I'm not interviewing him about the liturgy, so we don't get into that too much. But he's really known for that. He's the editor of Gottesdienst magazine, which is about liturgy and the divine service, God serving us. But we get into a really extended conversation on life theology, the first article, order of creation, and how this applies to your life as an individual, and then for us as pastors, and then as congregations. How does a congregation learn to love good order? And does the orders that we have for running and managing our congregations, does it serve us? Or is it serving itself? Is it actually hindering the work of the church in our midst? I thought we'd sit down for an hour. It ended up being an hour and a half, and it could have gone much longer. In fact, I hope to do it again sometime. I've been very pleased. Each of these interviews has been such a pleasant surprise. So without just sitting here and yammering about how I talk to people, without further ado, here is my conversation with Pastor David Petersen. Please enjoy. So today I have the privilege of interviewing Pastor David Petersen. Are you a doctor? I should have asked you that.
Well, I have a Doctor of Ministry degree.
Doctor of Ministry, Dr. David Petersen. You are the senior pastor at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Do you go by senior administrative, or you're both just pastors?
Just pastor.
Both just pastors?
Both, yeah.
And you're going to have to educate me here a little bit on your achievements. I know you're an editor for Gottesdienst, the Journal of the Lutheran Liturgy, and from what I've seen from Emmanuel Press, there's a number of your sermons that are being published recently. Thy Kingdom Come, Lent and Easter sermons, and God with Us, Advent and Epiphany sermons. But I have this inkling that you've written something else as a book in the past. Is that true?
I wrote a book a long time ago for CPH,
right?
A Bible study thing on numbers.
Okay, so you aren't.
That's really it, I think.
Is there the conduct of the service? Did you have something to do with that?
I was involved in that, and also the other book by Paul Lang.
Okay.
Ceremony and Celebration, but I didn't write those. We just facilitated the publishing of them.
Were you connected at all to the Brotherhood Prayer Book?
Not really.
Okay.
No, I helped those guys because they were students when they put that together.
Okay.
And so I was involved in it in a little bit of a sense. I gave them space. We kind of helped them, but no. And it still kind of lives here, because Ben Mays is a member here, and of course Michael Fries is the other pastor, and it's their thing. Baby.
Yeah. So for those who don't know of my listeners, Redeemer Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana, is a congregation with a strong history of liturgical practice, to the level that I would say the first time I sat here, I was a little, I don't want to say confused. It was new. I've grown up in what we call now Divine Service 2, Lutheran Book of Worship, West Coast, Missouri Synod. And so to see the care and attention that's given to the liturgy here, as opposed to, it's not like it was unliturgical. It was very much liturgical, what I grew up in, but very different. A level of reverence and concern that, I think, ultimately is sacramental. Redeemer is known for that amongst pastors, at least, and pastors who desire to be liturgical. You can't be and not know about Redeemer and its practice here. Also a congregation which had a school once upon a time, ended up closing that school. How long ago what was that?
45 years ago, almost.
Oh, wow. So it's been,
maybe not quite that, but yeah.
So the school's been gone for decades, but now, just this last year, 2 years, is
2 years now, yeah.
rebooting a classical school, kind of because it just sprouted up out of the ground. All I have is Heath Curtis mentioning it as he was consulting my congregation, which we're in a school closing process right now.
Oh, yeah.
But he just mentioned it kind of just fell out of the sky. So just 2 minutes on that idea.
Yeah, well, of course, nothing falls out of the sky, though it obviously appears like that from a distance. I wasn't much involved in that. That was one of our members, Nathaniel Pullman, who has a master's degree in politics from Hillsdale, also a bachelor's degree there. And his wife is the managing editor of The Federalist.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So they're very connected and aware, good thinkers, and concerned about the world and what do you do about it. And so, Joy Pullman is actually kind of the world expert on Common Core.
Okay, yeah.
An expert who's very critical of it.
Sure.
So she's been on Fox News, a bunch of stuff like that. So they had very much a concern about education and what's ideal for children. And they said, hey, we want to do this school. And I mean, it's been, we just kind of gave them space to do it.
Yeah.
We did things to kind of protect the congregation a little bit, which, I think there's going to be more and more of this going on, where they're under the umbrella of the congregation, but they're their own 501(c)(3).
Okay. Yeah.
So we try to limit somewhat our liability with them. They're financially independent of us, so we support them a little bit. We give them space again. They don't pay utilities, that kind of stuff, and obviously, we're their funders,
right.
The people within the congregation, but not the congregation as an entity.
Yeah.
So that's the way that it's gone. We've been very blessed in that, Nathaniel's been he's the headmaster, and with Joy working for the Federalist, they've been able to swing it that a lot of his time's been donated.
Yeah, okay.
So that's how it's gone. As far as the school, that's just kind of the process that it's taken on. As far as what they're doing, it's just phenomenal. This is probably, it's hard to... But I've been here at Redeemer for almost 19 years now, and I think the opening of this school is certainly in the top 2 or 3 most significant things that's ever happened.
Wow, okay.
And I did not anticipate how wonderful it would be. It's the greatest thing.
How much involvement do you have as a teacher?
All I do right now is we do matins every day, and I do catechesis with the children as part of matins.
Okay.
So, I have a half hour every day or 40 minutes every day with them. And they're all pretty little right now. We started with just what would be kindergarten and first grade. Now it's kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So we only have 11 students right now.
Okay.
So it's pretty, as they get older, that's going to have to be modified. But
Yeah.
So I don't have, it's not a burden at all.
No, but getting to do matins every day with them's got to be a little bit of a joy.
It's a blast.
Yeah.
Because I did matins by myself for years or with 2 or 3 people. Now it's full of children.
Yeah.
We sing, the hymn of the day, recite it's marvelous.
That's great.
Yeah, I love it.
And I was warned that we may hear them all going by at some point during this conversation. They're going to come running down this hallway. So I'm saying this for the listener again,
right.
That if you hear the kids in the background. So that direction of what you're talking about, separating the entities and the reasoning behind that, the idea of congregations as first article or real world organizations, that's some of what I want to pick your brain about, in part because along with Redeemer appearing to be a liturgical success in an age where many people say you can't do that, you can't be a surviving congregation with the liturgy. Along with that, Redeemer also gives the appearance, and maybe I'm just mistaken in what I look at, but gives the appearance of being a fairly successful organization. And that's what I'm very, very curious about. Why is it that some congregations just fumble to keep themselves together and others don't? Before we go there, though, I want to kind of lean into this from a tangent, and this may be a bit of a curveball. But I was sitting in this conference room waiting for just a moment, and I decided to look around. I see all these beautiful pictures of Luther, and I see this bookshelf with Luther's works, and there's ESVs and some LSBs, and then there's this Tide of Iron, Gates of Something tank war tabletop game. And it sits out of place just slightly. I'm curious, is that accidental? Did someone just forget that here? Is this something that you're into? You play tabletop game with the elders? And
no, well, this is it is in the wrong place. It wasn't put away, but I got a Lilly grant to do one of these sabbaticals about 10 years ago, and it was revolved around tabletop games.
Really?
And
That's cool.
The congregation put together, that was paid for by the Lilly Foundation, a whole library of these games.
Huh.
And so it's kind of faded away. It's not an active part of the congregation, but there's still a closet full of these games.
Huh.
And there's children in the building constantly, because we also have a very heavy homeschool contingent here.
Okay. Yeah.
In addition to the school. And so these games get kind of dragged out and left around. So
I also knew someone had told me once you drove a tank.
I did drive a tank.
Yeah.
I was a tank commander, yeah. I couldn't handle, I was too seasick to drive the tank. Thank God I was an officer, so I didn't have to drive.
Yeah.
I could have my head out of the hatch.
Oh, interesting. I never thought about how that would affect your balance, right? Because it's turning while you're driving it. Like
Well,
the top is
the
moving.
problem is the drivers down in the American tanks and the M1s. The driver's down kind of by the treads, and he can't see.
Wow.
So he's going up and down over the terrain like a boat,
And just kind of
almost.
being told where to turn.
Told where to go, and you can't see anything.
It's kind of like being on a submarine then,
Yeah,
a little bit.
I think I was fortunate. I didn't know I was going to be made sick by it, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Huh.
So,
And then back on tabletop games, I have an interest and love of tabletop gaming. I've recently started Dungeons and Dragons with my kids, and we're having a blast with it. I got 5 kids, and 4 of them can play. So you don't choose to do a grant or a sabbatical study like that unless you've got an interest in tabletop games. So you do have a long interest of games? Or?
Well, I did. As we've kind of, when our kids were young,
Yeah.
and we had gotten into Catan. This was before you could get them.
Yeah.
So they were called German games in those days. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I'm too young.
That was what they were called.
Huh.
They were kind of rare. You had to go to specialty shops.
Yeah.
And so we'd had Catan, and then we started to get some others. We got interested, and then we had this idea, the grant, those grants don't support, those Lilly grants, you can't do anything academic at all.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's difficult for our guys, Missouri Synod guys, to get them because, first of all the Missouri Synod guys want to do academic stuff. The second reason it's difficult for our guys to get them is that Lilly really prefers to support things that our guys are not interested in, like going and learning how to worship like a Hindu
Right.
or that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so it's always like, this kind of experiential thing. So anyway, I was looking for something because I wanted this grant.
Yeah.
It's a 3-month vacation.
Yeah.
Who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
And so what we did was we built it around, you have to have a congregational component.
Uh-huh.
So the idea, we had this gaming library, also a cookbook library, and a devotional book library.
Okay.
And then the idea was, how can we foster kind of family night and devotional life?
Yeah.
And so if it was like Rachel Ray, quick cooking. Let's have people actually stay home, together as a family, have dinner together, have devotions, play a game.
Huh.
So that was kind of the basis of it.
Yeah.
And then I got to go gallivanting around the country and goof off for 3 months and get paid.
Yeah.
It's great
That's
fun.
really cool. So this has another connection that's still a bit of a tangent, but is one that I kind of want to share with you and then hear your own experience with it. Because again, you are in the Missouri Synod Pastorate Young Confessional Liturgical Public Eye, right? Whether
Sure.
you like it or not, you are, and you have been. And my first experiences with you were, this huge figure doing liturgy and all this. And yet I heard you somewhere speak about the book 300. And I don't know how much that means anything to you. If you
mean the comic book or the book?
The
Okay.
comic book 300. Frank Miller?
Frank Miller, yeah.
I didn't know anything about it. I went out, I ordered a hardback, printed copy of it, big, beautiful thing. And to this day, it's one of the very few books I display in my study. It sits there, and the story of Leonidas remains near and dear to my heart. The connection between Thermopylae and Persia and some of the things going on in the intertestamental and exile period as well, I find absolutely fascinating. So is that something that was a big deal to you at one point in your life, or was that a throwaway line that you don't even know you did and it hit me like that?
I'm very interested in the classics. And so, of course, the Battle of Thermopylae, that's huge, right? And I've read Plutarch, and I'm not a classicist. I don't read Latin. So I'm just an amateur completely. But I have a very deep interest in that. And I also have had always a big interest in comic books.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm a Frank Miller fan. Huh. So I don't remember saying that. I don't know what I said. There's better stuff to read than that on Thermopylae.
Why are you yeah, there is. But why are you a Frank Miller fan?
Well, this is probably just, I was in high school. I liked comic books. Huh. And when I was in high school, The Dark Knight Rises by Frank Miller came out, and it was so different. The Watchmen and The Dark. I don't know how much you know about comic books.
I do. I actually am a fan too. It's been a while since I've been way into it. But so what did you find was different? What struck you as unique? I got into comics during the Image comics.
Oh, okay, a little after that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, you had this kind of dark. So before that, and mostly what I had read before that was Spider-Man, actually. That was my introduction. So I liked, when I was younger, I really loved how Stan Lee would kind of talk to the audience and how Peter Parker had kind of normal problems I could identify with. Yep. But then as I kind of got into high school, it seemed sort of childish. So, the Watchmen and The Dark Knight Rises, I love Miller's artwork.
Right.
So, the art's obviously a huge part of comics, but this sort of, which is, it's silly in hindsight way, but it seemed realistic. It seemed sort of possible.
Right.
And it was gritty and it was dark and, it didn't feel like childish. So I guess that's why I loved it.
That's good. That's a good thought. And I ask again because it's something I'm very curious in. I'm curious about the overlap of storytelling and art because I think that has a lot to do with the church, right? And much of what I'm trying to do within the storytelling element of my podcast is capture what comic books do, but in an audio form, and try to show how the Bible has the best stuff. It's just these amazing, amazing stories. So thank you for letting me pursue that thought a little bit. So the direction I'm going to turn it now, which again, these are all first article things. There's all this fighting about the 30s of the law, and I'm not against the 30s of the law, but I think the problem is not that we don't have the 30s. I think the problem is we've abandoned first article thinking. We don't treat the created order as if it's a created order. We act like somehow now that we're Christians, we can just go do whatever, and it all kind of is going to work out. And while, by all means, the promises of God are the thing which predominate and drive the church, the Word of God is going to accomplish what it says and what it does. Some of that is to drive us back to a love of the first article. So what I want to kind of dig into with you a little bit is just that theology to start with, that idea. And I'd like to then pursue it in a couple of corners, how it's impacted you as a human, as an individual pastor, your own patterns or actions or habits, the way you apply discipline in your life. I'm not talking moral discipline necessarily.
Right.
And then the congregation and some of its history and how you fit into that, whether you've changed it and whatnot. And then again, to bring it back a little bit to what it looks like with the school now. I'm curious about that, and then the homeschool overlap and the balance of those things. So let's just start with, first article theology and maybe your own spin. I did it very loosely there, but your own explanation of what that term even means as I throw it out there as jargon.
Yeah, well, it is the reality is that God is good, and the created order was given for us. I always come back to, I'm just astounded, at the beginning of Genesis, that the stars are put into heaven for the sake of marking the seasons and showing us. The stars are these huge, ridiculous things, all these light years away, and they're here to serve us, right? Humanity is the crown of creation. We're given dominion over the earth, and all of this is fitting together deliberately in God's plan for us. And that's corrupted by the fall to some degree, but restored in Christ. And we see in the created order a goodness and God's mercy and care for us, right? The fact that God still talks to us, that there's oxygen in the air.
Yeah.
I mean, because the threat was, you eat of this, you will die. And
Right.
they don't die. I mean, there's a spiritual death there, but they're not destroyed. He comes seeking them. Adam hides in fear because he thinks God has changed. God didn't change. God still loves Adam. He comes in mercy, seeking to be reconciled with Adam. Now, part of that is rebuking Adam, telling, right, and so forth. But, the word of God doesn't change. In fact, this is really, to me, just a fascinating thing. But, if you eat of this tree, you will surely die. Is that law or gospel? Neither, right? At least from a confessional perspective, because the confessions say the law always accuses. There's no accusation made there.
Right.
So if it's law, which it isn't, but if it's law, it's third use of the law. It's just simply instruction about what is good and what Adam loves, because he loves the things that God loves, right? It's not gospel. It doesn't forgive sins. Well, in a sense, it's neither law nor gospel. It's the word of God. And it's after the fall, when Adam changes, that now he perceives the word of God differently, sometimes threatening, accusing, sometimes forgiving, and so forth. So there's this reality that creation itself comes as a gift,
right.
out of love, and that order itself is comforting. So here's another thing that's kind of related that I think is really interesting, because our whole law gospel thing is problematic. As we know, in many ways, because it's an oversimplification that becomes cliches, that then becomes, at least it has the danger of becoming.
Right.
And I wrote my STM thesis on law and gospel. I'm a law gospel guy. I'm a Lutheran.
You're not talking about that law and gospel are wrong. You're saying that the way that we use the terms has problematic limitations. It's a limited vernacular.
Well said. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's right, and is subject to abuse, especially when we use kind of this terminology as a way to sort of force our own ways into things rather than an experiential reality. And we try to kind of use it against one another, against God, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sure.
So the thing is one of the things we say.
Ferdy.
Yeah,
I'm serious.
That's true. I know. Well, there's a reason that he is so helpful in many ways, but he's got some serious problems.
Agreed.
But anyway, and that's how we ought to read all theologians anyway,
Yes.
with discernment and carefully and critically. Anyway, we often talk about, well, the law can't comfort. And that's really a misleading statement to say, because there is a reality that the law does comfort the Christian in the sense that we rejoice in the order. And we rejoice in the fact that, think of a child, and the comfort that the child has from being disciplined by his mother, because he knows that the world has boundaries and safety, and she's looking for him and she cares for him. And we see this, and see again, so it just depends to some degree what you mean by the word law, but doctrine to some degree, all kind of doctrine is in a sense law. It's categorizing, it's establishing limits, but there's a comfort in it in knowing what our place is and where we fit. So the fact that I'm trying to think of something. Just the consequences of creation and the reality of creation is law, but it comes to us as gift out of God's.
Right.
And the order itself is comforting. That's why Christians love doctrine.
Yeah.
Or even I often use the example of when you've been suffering for years with strange symptoms and the doctors can't diagnose it, and then finally it gets this terrible name like, God forbid, Parkinson's or something.
Right.
There's this funny phenomena where there's relief that comes with the name.
Right. I remember when I was diagnosed with sleep apnea, when the phone call finally came to give the results, and they said, you have it. My first words were, thank God.
Yeah, because I'm not a lunatic. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that is fascinating. I love what you said, that the order itself is comforting. It was created by God to be a gift to us. And then to not put that into the jargon of law and conscience and morality, understanding that it's fallen, and our experience of it is fallen, and to my favorite line from Ferdy, I think, is that we misuse the good things of God in the worst possible way. So we take this order that's been given. We make an idol out of it. We try to justify ourselves with it. This is why the law then accuses us when it fails to be our God, right? So that is all there behind and under this glorious light of the proper distinction between law and gospel. But I'm with you in that I want to explore the order without being trapped into the language of first use, second use, third use, because I want to just love creation for what it is as well. I don't want to get rid of that language in its proper place. But I don't think it necessarily applies. Is my time management second use or third use? Like, that's just the wrong question, right?
Right. I think that's right.
And with that, though, I think that we have trouble, especially as Missouri Synod, with things like time management. And that's going to then lead us a little bit into congregational dynamics as well. But let's go then toward your personal world a little bit and some of your disciplines. I don't know what you do. Maybe you're complete, mess all the time. But I can't imagine you've achieved what you've achieved in life without some form of focused discipline to how you handle your days and your time. So experience with that, business reading, entrepreneurial reading, time management reading. I don't know. We don't have to go forever on it, but your thoughts on that direction.
Yeah, well, I do all of that. I'm very much into kind of productivity stuff.
Yeah, sure.
I subscribe to productivity RSSs or whatever that, what
Yeah,
I'm talking about.
yeah.
I don't even know the lingo. But so the big things that I use now currently, I mean, it's you're always tweaking this
Right.
and falling off the wagon and getting back on. But the two things that I find most useful are some version of a to-do list, which currently now I've been doing the bullet journal thing,
Sure.
a modification of that. But it's just a glorified to-do list. I always have used a to-do list. The only difference with the bullet journal is I have a journal, and so there's a record of what I've done. Mm-hmm. And I like the ability to make some lists and things that I can refer back to. So
Right.
it's been a good thing for me. Everybody adapts it to himself.
Right.
But anyway, some sort of way of tracking the tasks that need to be done, and so that I don't lose sight of them. And the other great thing for me with that, which everybody says with bullet journaling, and I've been onto this for years, is that when something comes up, if you can write it down, you can let go of it.
Yes.
So you don't have to
Yes.
worry about remembering it. So just
Yes.
boom, I'm going to write it down right now. And so the advantage of the journal, I'll just say over the to-do list that I had in the past, is now I have a page that's dedicated to books I want to read, movies I want to see.
Yep.
And that's just a great thing, because if I had that at the bottom of my to-do list, when the to-do list is full, I'd throw it away.
Or you got to rewrite it.
Or
whatever.
rewrite
Yeah.
it. So that the journal works good for little things, not huge things. And the habit tracker I like too.
Yeah, that's cool. Bullet journaling is something that I've explored. The adaptability of it is what's great. I have my own critique of it, but I could share that with you another time. It definitely. I did it for about a year, and it's a huge step in the right direction. There's something about the analog level of it too. I've done a lot attempting to do it all via computer and have it all be digitalized, and it just becomes a ball of mess really quickly. And bullet journal lets you pull those things apart and kind of space yourself away from them. You mentioned writing it down and having it like no longer have to be done. So are you familiar with, or I'd be on your mind, are you familiar with Getting Things Done, David Allen?
Yeah, I am. I read the book.
Okay.
And I don't know, for some reason that just didn't appeal to me. I think that it did influence me some. So that
that idea is like a key principle.
Yeah, the idea is a great idea. Do the things that you can do right now and get over with and so forth. There's another book called, but anyway, a book that was more influential than that book for me was this book, Eat the Frog.
Oh, I don't know that one at all.
And
I like the title.
Yeah, and again, they really, you've got one idea, they make a whole book out of it.
Yeah.
They could do it in a paragraph probably. But the Eat the Frog is basically you do the hardest thing first thing in the morning.
Oh, right.
Because
sure.
you're going to run out of willpower.
Yeah.
So do the thing you don't want to do.
Right.
And but the thing I use the most than any of this is this Pomodoro. And I may have talked to you about that before.
No, I'm not familiar with that either.
Oh, you don't know Pomodoro?
I don't even know how to spell it.
It's the best. Oh, I don't know how to spell it either. It's some Italian word for apple or something, I think. I can't remember. But there's nothing to it. Here's all it is. I set a timer, 25 minutes, and I'm going to work on one thing solid for 25 minutes. And then there's a 5-minute break when the timer goes off, and then you can start again. But if you're in the flow, you just ignore. I mean, I'll just keep going, of course.
Yeah.
Why would you?
Yeah.
Well, so I'm pretty strict about it. I'll tell the secretary, don't knock on my door for 25 minutes.
Yeah,
I'm not answering the phone, nothing else. Look, we're not medical professionals. Anything can wait.
Right.
The worst is if they call at the exact minute you start, they got to wait 25 minutes, right? That's not that long. And, of course, chances are they're going to call 10 or 15 minutes. They're not going to wait that long. It can wait. And that ability to focus on one thing, right, to do nothing else. Obviously, you're not going to look at email or anything else.
Right.
And so for me, like when I was trying to accomplish what for me was difficult, like finishing this D-Min dissertation or write a book or whatever, it would feel overwhelming. And, I'd get started on it. I'd say, okay, I'm going to work for an hour. This was back when I was doing my STM thesis, when I really started it. And I would okay, I got a 2-hour block. I'm going to work on this. Well, I get 10 or 15 minutes into it, bored out of my mind, just want to shoot you can't, right?
Right, it's too big.
It's too big. So I would end up, kind of quit or whatever. Well, with the 25 minutes is just magic for me because, I could get going for 10 minutes and then be bored and want to quit. Look at the timer. Okay.
You can do 15.
15 and then I can quit.
Yeah.
And it would enable me to keep going because I knew there was an end. And, very frequently, getting over that 10-minute or 15-minute hump, then I'd kind of get in the flow and I'd be able to just keep going.
Yep.
And then it's like grace, I mean, it's just like, this is free time. It's like, so we do this with tithing. I totally believe in tithing and that this is in the Bible. I think this is look, we don't kick people out of church for not tithing. We don't kick people. I expect our members to come to church every Sunday. I expect them to read the Bible every day, and I expect them to tithe. Now, I have no idea how many of them do all that.
Sure.
Obviously, we got people that, come to church once a year. And they're members here in good standing, technically. So, we're not legalists. We're not. But
I like the adverb, technically.
Well, so, right. I'm just saying that. But that's what I expect as the pastor. Mm-hmm. So I love tithing. It's like, so the great thing about tithing for me is, and has been my whole marriage, because my father-in-law taught me this, we just, boom, 10% off the top, all income just goes straight into the church offering. No questions asked. We don't even think about it. Well, then what happens, of course, is other things come up that we love or care about that we want to support. And then we just give freely.
Yeah.
Without any kind, and there's no, I don't feel guilty if you come to me, Jonathan, and you say, I'm starving and I'm homeless and I'm out of gas. I don't feel guilty if I say, no, I'm not going to help you because I tithed.
Yeah, right.
But I know this is, it's a kind of a mental thing. Yeah. I'm not saying this is, but as a discipline,
yeah, sure.
I'm just like, look, I've done what I'm supposed to do, but now I have the freedom,
right,
to give you money to help you because I want to,
right,
in a sense. And maybe that doesn't make sense, but it's a related concept to me.
Yeah. I think it makes sense. It's about the order giving you the freedom to then do more. Really, at the end of the day, when you're talking about the homeless, this just came up recently in Bible study. There's always the trouble of if they want cash, how are you really helping them? So that's a whole nother.
Sorry, shouldn't have used that example.
Yeah, but I think that the point makes sense. And so going back to the Pomodoro, the 25 minutes, it seems like not only does it give you that short goal, small wins. You have small wins so you can win often, then you'll want to win more. But then it gets you past that starting point thing as well. One of the things I've been trying to tell myself recently is 200 words a day, because 200 words is nothing. Right. You can do 200 words in 15 minutes, but you never write 200 words. You start going, the ideas start flowing, and you do quite a bit more than that. So I love that as well. Same kind of idea. It sounds like we could probably just keep going on bullet journaling and this kind of stuff, but I want to transition a little bit to then your experience in congregations. And I want to leave that really broad and open. I know Redeemer's not your first call. I don't know how much of this kind of productivity you're into when you had your first call, but just to kind of paper trail it a little bit here or breadcrumb it, from first call on, I have been stunned at the lack of organization in Missouri Synod congregations. with the tremendous amount of red tape paperwork that we pretend is organization, that we pile on top of it, right? That generally ends up harming both the Christian and the congregation. Now, that's pretty broad, so I'll let you kind of just read into it what you will.
Well, I mean, I'm with you, and I think that and of course there's different sizes of congregations and there's all sorts of unique situations for every place. But I think typically, and probably almost without exception, our constitutions that are supposed to be guiding how we operate are incredibly complicated and ridiculous, and tend to be more of a hindrance.
Why? I agree, but why?
They tend to be too binding and too specific in things. You have to have 6 elders. You have to have this kind of thing, that they don't allow kind of adaptability, and they don't allow some. I mean, again, I know constitutions are all different, but I think there's a tendency to kind of over legislate things like, what do you do if there's a vacancy? You have to have a special voters meeting. Well, that's ridiculous. You ought to allow the council or the chairman to appoint. Just different things like that. So there's just lots of specificity in constitutions that actually can be a hindrance, and of course usually they're just not followed, which is fine, except if you get sued. Yeah, right. So so I think that there's a funny thing that our constitutions are inflated. Is really, I think what happened was we're trying to protect, or when these things were formed, it was kind of infected by a spirit of American capitalism and corporatism, and also pretending as though we were more than what we are, and not really thinking about the church as the body of Christ, but thinking about the church as a corporation, a school board or something.
We don't think about it as those things. I don't think enough, right? As a corporation.
Well, I mean, the problem is we're thinking about it as the wrong sort of thing. I mean, we're thinking about it as this complicated, large, bureaucratic organization that needs lots of checks and balances and so forth, and not really the kind of, because what it really is a family. And I mean, the family dynamics are what I think are we ought to be more aware of. How do we operate, when, okay, so you get into now the reality is, grandpa's cranky.
Right.
But we still love grandpa, and how do we work around him, and how do we work with him, and how do we actually honor him and get him to do what he's supposed to do?
Right.
And so there's a lot more of that kind of stuff that goes on.
Yeah. When was the last time your family had a board meeting?
Right. That's not the way we operate, Exactly. So but families still have to do all that. There's still planning involved in a family.
Right.
There's still, assignment of tasks, organizations, chores,
Well, that runs straight into the idea of fatherhood, too, and headship, and marriage, even, relation between man and woman. I mean, there's so many implications there. I don't know if we need to go quite into that, but that is really curious. How do you, I'll ask it this way then. You can wave a magic wand. How do you organize a congregational family so that you can still be a nonprofit organization, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I think we have to have the sort of corporate stuff. I wasn't really meaning, but we have to, I think, have kind of two things simultaneously. And I think that our constitutions and that kind of legal side of it should be simplified to allow kind of as much flexibility as possible. But then there's the reality that, we're not making decisions as the leadership of the congregation purely on financial. We're thinking we're thinking relationally, and so there's all these funny. So I'll tell you some of my kind of tenets of congregational leadership that I've developed. I mean, all of this stuff. I mean, including all this stuff's come by, failure basically.
Right.
And trying stuff and learning and being frustrated. So I'm not trying to say I got all the answers, and I'm still working on it. But one of the things, I mean. There's a number of things that I think are tempting for pastors and for congregations. And one of those is to try to get people involved by making them be involved, which never works. No. So it's like we got a vacancy, or we got a member that comes, once a month or every other week, or just kind of hot and cold. Let's make her a Sunday school teacher.
Right.
No, don't. Because people have kind of a level of commitment that they're comfortable with and is natural to them. I'm not speaking biblically here,
Right.
just experientially.
Yep.
And the problem is you try to push them beyond that. I've not seen it work. I've not seen people get more active by assigning them a job to do. What happens is the job just falls through the cracks, and now we have this problem of we don't know how to handle it because we don't know when she's going to come, and if we try to do it for her, she'll be insulted, so then nothing.
Right.
So I'm a big fan of vacancies.
Yeah.
I would rather have a vacancy on the board than have a person in it that's not really committed or reliable. And the problem is that you have to make, again, a kind of pastoral decision, because if you put this person on the spot and you say, will you be committed to this? And she only comes to church once a month, every other week. She'll say yes because she knows she's supposed to.
Right.
And she wants to be it part of her. So you can't ask her that because she's going to tell you what you want to hear and what she thinks she should say, and then she's not going to do it.
In my experience, getting a group to acknowledge that a vacancy is okay is one of the hardest things to do as a pastor. It's private confession's probably harder, but not much.
Yeah.
Not much. Because the Constitution, for whatever reason, will ignore it, and yet then we won't, right?
Right,
So we
I
have
know.
to have a VP, even though the guy doesn't do anything. Serves like no purpose in most constitutions.
Right.
So we got to make someone come to a meeting once a month, right? I feel like this is an idolatry of sorts. And I don't mean that in a way that these are all non-Christian, they're not Christians, but the way our flesh manages to just kind of wiggle in and attach itself to things that we think are going to give comfort. Without then, for whatever reason, the pagans are better than us at this. They can assess the organization for what the organization is supposed to be without turning it into kind of a view of the church itself. And again, that's kind of broad and wiggly there. Let me shift it a little bit then back toward Redeemer then. I think I sent you an email maybe 6 months ago where I asked you for Redeemer's Constitution. I was trying to gather constitutions, and you guys did give it to me. Not everyone got me one. And I just found it last night when I was doing some purging of my reference files. And I found it there, and I glanced at it, and it looks pretty typical. I didn't read, but it looks pretty typical Missouri Synod style constitution. Is it? Have you done much tweaking on it? And then with that, how is your experience of Redeemer when you came here? Am I wrong in my experience or my viewpoint that it's this sort of long-standing, well-organized thing that at least has been able to pass itself forward a couple generations without completely collapsing? There's a lot in that question. So
yeah,
wherever you
well,
wanna go.
we actually are in the process of tweaking the Constitution right now.
Yeah.
And one of the things we're doing is getting rid of the vice chairman. And just simply, so we just now have that the chairman will assign someone on the board to be the vice chair. Because we don't need a vice chair
Right.
month to month. It's just stupid to have
Right.
a position with no job. So stuff like that, we are trying to simplify some of these things. Redeemer has, like everybody, a complicated history. I find it fascinating, but I don't want to bore you too much.
I'm curious.
So it was part of it's English district. So it was, kind of very pro-America, anti-German, anti-school, typical kind of English, in the name of missions, right? We want our kids to be Americans and to look like Americans, smell like Americans. Now, never had anybody, of any kind of statistical significance join the congregation that wasn't of German ancestry.
Yeah, right.
That's the Missouri Synod, that's the English district, right?
Right.
So anyway, that's what they wanted to be, and that's who they were. And as was very kind of normal in the founding of the English district, or at least somewhat typical, pretty liberal in terms of within that era.
Okay.
Wanting to be kind of progressive, wanting to change. So that was Redeemer's history. Then the English district the English Synod becomes part of the English district. We're Missouri Synod. And then we got there, so that was the 1880s, 90s. In 1941, Erwin Kurth was called to be the pastor here. And he was their kind of really first celebrity kind of pastor.
Okay.
He wrote, I can't think of the name of it, the catechetical book, which you probably know. Kurth's Catechetical Helps.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So he was very involved in TLH, which was published in 1941. He was assigned by the Commission on Worship for the Midwest to take this choir of three women around the Midwest to teach the music of TLH to other congregations. Just like they did with LSB.
Yeah.
So And so he was a liturgical guy. He instituted every Sunday communion. TLH was high church in some ways in those days. So that was the beginning of kind of the Redeemer liturgical stuff and the sacramental stuff. Kurth also signed the Statement of the 44.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Most listeners won't know about that, but it was sort of a pre-liberalism leading to Seminex thing. So without going too far into that.
It basically was we should commune with other Christians.
Yeah.
That was the gist of it. The Missouri Synod's too strict. So Kurth was part of that. Then he left left in 1950. Herb Lindemann came, and he was, again, kind of a powerful preacher, a presence in the Synod at large, and very much on the left of things now.
Okay.
And again, signed the Statement of the 44, and was also a huge Seminex supporter. Part of all that. So Redeemer was a Seminex congregation.
Wow.
And then he left in 75, and Charles Evanson came, my predecessor.
So they had a Seminex supporter over the 73 to 75. He leaves in 75, and they did not leave Synod.
Right. So this was the thing. So he left. He went to Valparaiso, and then very shortly went to what ended up being the ELCA. And he had been gearing the congregation to leave. So the Tejan spoke at Redeemer when he was doing his tour in Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
And so the congregation was divided, but the minority was kind of for the Missouri Synod. So we got big division in the congregation over that. We also had the assistant pastor was having an affair with the office secretary. They were the assistant pastor,
just to make things easier.
Yeah, the assistant pastor was having cowboy masses and things on Saturday night.
Sure.
And the other, so there was kind of this liturgical thing, but it had kind of gone weird in kind of Valparaiso liturgical dance and some other stuff. So we had worship wars going on.
Yeah.
And since the end of World War II, the neighborhood was in absolute decline. The two most violent home invasion murders that have ever taken place in Fort Wayne happened in the late 60s, early 70s, within blocks of Redeemer. Where, and I mean, it's just the typical story of the era. And I mean, there's all sorts of controversy whether it's true and all this, but the accusation was this young black man enters into a house, he murders the whole family in their beds. He goes to jail, he commits suicide. So that's why they don't know if he really did it.
Right.
And then another house down a couple blocks away, a year later, again, a young black man enters into a house and murders an elderly white lady. Well, so the white people of German ancestry just they're leaving the neighborhood by droves.
Right.
So it was just a perfect storm of everything bad almost that could happen to a congregation. Here comes Evanson, he inherits this. And he's just a rock. He just endures. So he's here from 75 to 2000. Twice in that time, they call voters' assemblies to remove him from office.
Wow.
The congregation, we're transferring people out, by the hundreds almost a year. And so the congregation's shrinking, financially destitute. Evanson has to close the school.
Okay.
It had only been open a few years. And everything's kind of bad, but Evanson just endures and suffers. And God be praised for him. He saves this congregation for the Missouri Synod. He just simply won't move. He's very patient. The congregation's sending money to Seminex. So, they're supporting Seminex at some level, but he won't leave the Synod.
Right. So this isn't just him being a jerk. Like, he's holding to the Bible is true, and the congregation has been trained to believe it's not. And that's underneath all the rest of it, that's why people are leaving, right?
Well, that's one of there's just all sorts of reasons for them to leave. But
Right. The neighborhood and all that too.
Yeah.
But in terms of his endurance, there's this image of the steadfast pastor who just is he's holding the line, but he's actually just kind of a jerk. And that's not quite the picture you're painting. He is very much in the midst of the trenches against some real false teaching in the congregation.
And he didn't take it on very head on. He was just kind of endured and just patiently, quietly went about things. So he was he didn't say we can't send money to Seminex. But he just kept going, and he just wouldn't leave. It was a long game. And by 1993 or so, things had really settled down. The congregation finally calmed and was just steady. And then I came, 7 years later, he was also a brilliant theologian. He just died about 3 months ago.
Okay.
We buried him.
Did he stay here?
He was in Lithuania for 20 years almost, and then he had gotten ALS.
Yeah.
So he was in Florida, but he was buried out of here.
He retired to Lithuania, or did he just?
He got a call from the Fort Wayne Seminary and was deployed over there, and then eventually was called, just one of these bureaucratic kind of things. But he did theological education in the Baltic countries.
So you're looking at this call on your desk. I don't know what background brought you to the point where you're on the list or any of that, but you're looking at this call. You're looking at the information about the congregation. What was your first thought? Or did you already know about Redeemer and have like a draw to it in some way?
Yeah, I knew about it from when I was a student in Fort Wayne, and then I could just see that it was just a diamond in the rough.
Okay.
I mean, Evanson, again, he saved the congregation. Things had calmed down and were steady, but there was a cost to be borne for suffering that way, and he had kind of siege. He had endured a siege.
Yeah.
And so he kind of still had that mentality, and so anyway, they were kind of sitting on a lot of resources, and I thought a lot of stuff was ready to be done, and I could see or it seemed to me. And I wasn't the only one. I don't mean I had some kind of brilliant insight.
Right.
But I mean, it was pretty obvious. This place has got potential. It's got resources. Things aren't what they used to be.
Well, that's kind of that gets us back to our loving of order. So what do you mean? You don't have to go too specific, but when you say that, like you looked at it and you saw the congregation had potential. Like in our first article discussion from earlier, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, this is going to be depressing, I'm afraid, to a lot of pastors hearing this. I mean, frankly, we had demographic strength.
Okay.
It's almost impossible to fight demographics.
Yeah.
So the neighborhood had already declined to where it couldn't decline any further.
Right.
And the congregation owned the building, and the congregation had a small endowment, and so there was some resources there. And then I could just see that, having come through this history, the people. I mean, this is the biggest resource, of course. The people that were left, there weren't tons of them. I mean, I think in those days our attendance was. We didn't have 100 people in church on Sunday morning, so it was relatively small for what they were trying to do. It was probably about 80, but those people were committed.
Yeah, they
weren't going to leave. So for a story I often tell and think of, I don't commune people that have left our congregation and joined the ELCA.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm with you.
So if they come back for Christmas Eve, to visit their parents, I don't commune them.
Yeah.
Well, this created a lot of problems, and I destroyed our Christmas Eve service. We went from like 250 people down to like 60 people on Christmas Eve. And
first year?
Yeah. So the first year was 220.
Yeah.
And the second year was
right.
And then the third year it kept going down. But the thing that was really hilarious to me. And strange to me, having come from another call, was so that I'd have these, here comes Mom, who's a member here, and she comes in and she tells me, you're going to commune my children, because they were confirmed here. And I said, that's the reason I'm not going to commune them, because they broke their confirmation vows.
Yeah.
And, and I'm not going to do this. And, tried to explain it and teach and the whole bit, but, she wasn't buying it.
Yeah.
But she was able, this was the amazing thing about the people of Redeemer at that era, she was able to distinguish and to separate kind of my decision and my theological opinion and the way I was going to conduct my office from my person. So she was like, you're wrong, and on the last day when you have to stand before Jesus, you're going to find out. But, I can understand that you're trying to do the right thing and you think you're doing the right thing, and I don't hate you, and I'm not going to quit. And I'm not going to talk behind your back.
Wow.
And I'm not going to withhold my offerings.
Wow.
I know. See, that's huge.
Yeah.
So, I really have been blessed by that. And I was like, when that happened, and this wasn't like a single event, I was like, this is fantastic. Now, I never did get those people. They never did come. They're all gone, basically, now.
Yeah.
But, they never did believe me in those things. But there was this marvelous thing where I was they weren't quitters, because if they were going to be quitters, they would have quit.
Yeah.
And they weren't, and they just kind of had this idea that, well, the pastor needs to do his job, and we can come in and tell him what we think, but ultimately we're going to allow him to do it. That's
a huge thing. That's a huge thing.
Yeah, that makes all the difference.
I've been in a number of different size congregations with different dynamics, and it's only been in the very large ones that the family-run business mentality has not been there, where, you're the pastor, we called you, but it's our church, and this is how we do it. And that's not always like to your face, but it certainly is in the water. And so to not have that, it makes me curious too. The only places I've ever seen that not be was at Bethany Naperville, where the congregation had 400 on a Sunday. So it's too big for everyone to have a vested interest in what gets done, and they just have to let go to the staff a little bit. And then I've experienced that currently in Rockford, which formerly was a congregation of that size, like Redeemer was formerly a congregation of that size. Something about when it gets so big you can't have your hands in it, it just becomes, the office is going to deal with that. I'm curious about that, because then the next question I had, kind of even before we got to that, was so what do you say to, you said it's going to be depressing to pastors who might listen to this. I don't know if pastors even listen to this podcast, but what would you say to a young pastor who he cares about productivity, he cares about organization, he cares about the longevity of the congregation, and he is in a parish that doesn't, and he can't move that ball? I mean, does he just have to do 25 years of Evanston indoors? Is that it?
I think that's the only answer. I'm sorry in a sense. I wish there was some other way. But I think he takes a hit for the team. He sets it up for the next guy.
Yeah.
The way Evanston did for me.
So explain that. Just put some meat on those bones. I love that. Sets it up for the next guy. There's this weird. It's not a mythology, but it's this weird family trait in the Missouri Synod that, we don't believe that the outgoing pastor can leave information for the incoming pastor. I think it's nonsense. Every time I've left a packet with the guy's name on it, information about the shut-ins and what their needs are, information about the congregation, where I've moved them. You don't have to move them that way, but it's where I moved them, right? I don't know why we think we can't do this. So anyway, sets it up for the next guy. What's in that phrase for you?
Well, you're not going to get your way. You're going to endure and suffer and put up with it. But see, part of the problem, like with that family business mentality, is that's based upon the fact that these people expect to outlast you.
Yes. Yeah.
So, they've outlasted everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's ever stayed that long. If you're there, and again, don't hear me. And not every situation is made for this, and not, So
Right.
I'm not saying it's wrong to leave, but if a guy can stay, he can make changes over time, and he will just win. Evanston won. They voted to remove him. The first time they missed by 7 votes to get the 2/3 they needed, and then the second time they missed by 20. So, he was not popular here. It was ugly, and people were mean to him. But, he outlived them. That's what I mean by setting but I agree with you too. There's this other funny thing about the Missouri Synod that's related to what you said about, there's all these myths because we become these weird charismatics when it comes to the call.
Yeah.
That's not Lutheran. The thing is look, the Holy Spirit, this is a divine call. The Holy Spirit works through human means. And human means are messy, and there's no reason not to take advantage of it. I tell congregations you absolutely should interview. I don't even know if you remember this.
Oh, yeah.
In the old days, there was this taboo.
I think they should listen to his sermons.
Yeah.
That was taboo too, right?
Yeah.
You weren't allowed to do it.
Because this is an institutional fantasy that every Missouri Synod pastor is Orthodox.
Right.
You have to be just...
Or
check your brain at the door to believe that.
Or
competent or any of that. And also, to some degree, is going to fit.
Right.
Okay, but all of that's legitimate.
Yep.
And it's not sinful for a call committee to want to get a pastor they ought to all want one that's Orthodox, and so forth. So, it's just the same kind of stuff that we can't talk about these things, or we have to act like this, this Holy Spirit just works directly and so forth. It's ridiculous.
Or can't overlap or have contact with there's a place where you could leave and be a thorn in the flesh of the guy who follows you, right? You don't want to be that. Yeah, the way we handle the call, to bring it back to your family metaphor from earlier, it's like we do mail order brides.
Yeah,
almost,
that's right.
Yeah, it's insane. With the talking to the guy about the long game, and I threw that phrase out earlier, and you seem to have it resonate with you. I don't know if we have to talk more about it specifically, but I know from my experience in hard calls, what I did not have was grit. And I don't know how to get that grit. I still don't know how to get that grit, much less how to give it to a younger guy who is finding himself in a similar situation. And I think we're deceiving ourselves if we don't recognize that a large percentage of the best Missouri Synod congregations are organizationally dysfunctional and financially in dire straits, and this is going to continue for the next 30 years, 40 years, maybe more. Where do we get the grit? How do we stop, I want to use a different word, complaining to each other like little girls about how hard it is to be a pastor in America, and actually just decide to do what needs to be done to win the long game?
Well, I mean, some of what we could do is go get a real job for a while and find out how hard that is.
Really is, yeah.
But, there's nobody. I don't know. There's such vanity in the pastoral office, which, okay, so we do actually have, and I'm not ashamed to say that the vocation of pastor is the most important vocation in the world, next to mother and father. It's the means by which God is established and by which he gives out the gospel. So we shouldn't act like all vocations are just equal. There's a whole nother problem with Wingren's version of Luther's theology on vocation.
Oh,
it's all law. That, again, is problematic and creates problems. But anyway, not all vocations are equal. And vocation's not only law. So those are just two things to talk about some other day.
Yeah.
But the thing is that every vocation, I mean, not even every job is hard. That's why they pay people to do it. And the thing is that the things that pastors are suffering and enduring in their calls are mostly not unique. It's just that we elevate them because they have a spiritual component. But, people put up with look, we don't often have to fire people. That's one of the worst things in the world. We don't often have to deal, depends if you have a school and stuff.
I wish we could fire a
I know.
member or two.
Well, that's another thing I'd love to talk about, is this kind of what is pastoral leadership.
Yeah.
Because it's not the same as running a business or being in the military. But anyway, I think, so some of the getting over this is to kind of get over ourselves and recognize, I have to do things I don't enjoy because this is a job, and I'll be frank, for me, I don't really enjoy going and seeing the shut-ins. I know there are guys that do. For me, I do it. I schedule it and I do it because I have to do it. And if I don't schedule it, I'll put it off. And now, God be praised, I often enjoy myself when I'm there.
Once you get there, yep.
But I just hate going. I don't want to make appointments, whatever it is. So look, there's things you don't like doing, and you still have to do them. And, if you worked in a bank, you'd have to do things you don't like doing.
How much of this...
So look at it as a job, I think.
A job and a war.
Yeah.
And a war. I'm convinced that the loss of martial language in the church is a huge loss for the whole church, membership, laity, particularly included. But for the pastorate, young men in battle, I mean, if you're in the trench, you really think you're going to get a foot rub. I mean, this is where we are. You should expect to be hated. I've actually, I won't mention his name, but there was I think it was 2 years, maybe just a year out of SEM, ran into one of the leading professors from St. Louis when I was there. And he kind of asked how it was going, and I shared a little bit. He said, well, is there anything we could have done better? And I said, you could have told me they'd hate me.
Yeah.
Like, you could have just told me that. You could have prepped me for this. We don't. We are, and this is where, as much as I'm into productivity, we treat pastoral education, at least in my experience, like theological entrepreneurship. We're prepped to go run a small business that will succeed because you're going to be so great at figuring it out, as opposed to theological warfare and almost spy-level warfare to some extent. It's not like you want to lie to people, but you don't have to come in and change it all the first week. You can take a slower approach and play the long game, and you can learn to, realize it's a fight and that you're going to get your nose bloody sometimes, and that's okay. It's part of the job. Stand back up, right?
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Well, I always use this line. When you're in our grandfathers at the Battle of the Bulge, they weren't writing and saying, send us more socks. They were saying, send us more bullets.
Bullets, yeah.
You know, because they were engaged in a fight, and what mattered, you know, they weren't going to win the fight with socks. And I think an awful, again, right?
Yeah.
So to see it as a job, that there's just tasks I have to do, some of them are unpleasant or aren't entertaining, you know, but just, and to quit thinking that you know, the purpose of being a pastor is to feed my own spiritual needs all the time.
Right.
But again, just to look at it kind of just coldly, you know, you go to work, you know, you need to be to work early. you need to accomplish tasks.
Yeah.
You need, and you know, we all have our the things we don't like, the things we push off. I'm terrible at actually administration. That's why I actually try to do some of this stuff, because otherwise it's really bad. And, you know, I think there are coping mechanisms and devices. You can try to find somebody to help you, you know, externally and things.
Yeah.
But yeah, the just looking at it as a job instead of, you know, that I'm this holy servant that's been sent to God and people don't appreciate me. You know, I always give this story of, maybe you've heard me before, with this waitress thing. You know, so here's the other thing. We exaggerate our own sorrows and the significance of the conflict we have with our members. So what happens is, you know, a guy comes through after service and says something impolite or kind of rude to you and, you know, insults you in some way,
Right.
whatever, or in a meeting, whatever it is. Well, you know, he goes home and really forgets about it.
Yeah.
So the example I use is, you know, we all eat at restaurants. We've all had waitresses. We all think we know what a waitress's job is, and we think we know how to do her job. And when we have bad service, we think we know what bad service is. And so we're angry about it, or we're frustrated, and we're tempted, and sometimes probably have, said something rude to her or left a really small tip to teach her a lesson because that wasn't good service. And then we walk out the door, we get in the car, we're gone.
Yeah.
We have no idea what that does to her.
Yeah.
Right? And we don't know what the circumstances are. Who didn't show up for the shift? What's going on in the kitchen?
Yeah.
You might have had exemplary service.
For what was going on, yeah.
But you just judged it on your own little world. You don't know, right? You don't know what's going on, but you felt like you did. You break her heart, right? And then you get in your car and drive away, and by the time you get to the first stoplight, you forgot all about it. She dwells on it, right? All night, you know, can't sleep that night.
Yep.
Well, I think there's a similar phenomenon.
I think that's really good. Yeah.
And so what happens is we make too much of what we ought to realize that they don't know what they're talking about all the time, and that they also don't really quite mean it.
Right.
They're just like us at the waitress. If they knew, they wouldn't. And the truth is, they're not, most of them. I know there's some evil people out there, but most of the time they don't really mean it. They don't know what they really said. And if there was the opportunity, the ability to show them and so forth, they would apologize.
Yeah.
So I think we take their criticisms too deeply in a way. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense.
And most of the guys that have suffered, like, you know, they're going to get removed from office, it's like Evanson. It's really hard to get 2/3 of the lay people to vote against a pastor to remove them.
Yeah.
But usually what happens is our guys break psychologically, which I'm not criticizing them.
No, it's a problem, and we got to find a way to deal with it.
But if we could get them to endure a little longer and go to the voters' assembly, they might outlive it.
Right.
You know?
Well, and that's what my question is, again, about grit and Nietzsche here, will to power a little bit. You know, how can we? So it's what I love about hero movies and comic books so much. The heroes that I'm drawn to are these guys who endure. They literally just don't budge. I don't know if you mentioned Spider-Man earlier. I don't know what you thought about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I've adored all those movies. I love what they've done with them, and I loved Infinity War more than all the rest because Thanos is the best protagonist I have ever seen because he endures and sacrifices for the good. He's wrong the whole way through, but his will to do what must be done. And I so much of this here is my own, you know, psychological need, trying to find that for myself as I wrestle with these little quips and comments that I come home and oh, it's so bad. They did, you know, what was the one just recently? It was such a silly little thing that was said, you know, and I rolled over it all afternoon and trying to find, you know, can I find the productivity? Can I find the psychological help? Whatever it can be, what continued learning can I do to become better equipped to be back in the trench so that I ask for more bullets rather than wonder about my socks. And some of that then is I guess what the edge of this podcast that is interviews is going to continue to pursue for you listener out there is, I'm trying to learn how to be better at what I do. Brian Wolfmueller said this really well. He said, I want to be equipped to do more good, right? And so that's so much of what this is and what my questioning is for you. I really would love to just keep going on and on. We're over an hour. If you don't mind, maybe 10, 15 more minutes. I have some quick hit questions I'd like to just go with here. So 2 to 5 sentence kind of answers. How do you measure success at the end of your day?
That's why I like a to-do list. So, because the problem is when I didn't have a to-do list, I would come home and my wife would ask me, what did you do all day? And I wouldn't be able to tell her. And I need, so I measure success by having tasks and having completed them. So I don't think we should be thinking so much about was that there's a place for this also, but was that a good sermon? Was that a good Bible class? But I mean, just did I write the sermon or do this part of the sermon?
Yeah.
So that's how I measure.
Checking off the list. What is something you believe that most Lutherans do not believe?
Well, tithing we already mentioned.
Okay.
I think
that's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
there you go, tithing.
Okay, that's a great answer. You were going to say something else, though, did you?
No, I don't know. That's good.
What book have you reread the most, and you can't say the Bible or the Confessions?
I'm sort of embarrassed to say. I think I've read the Lord of the Rings 4 times.
Okay.
I normally don't like to reread. I read a lot of fiction, and I normally don't reread anything. And I never want to watch a movie I've seen ever again.
Really?
I know. My wife thinks I'm crazy with it. Like if I've seen the movie, I don't want to see it again.
Oh.
I always want something new.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
probably a weakness of me.
With that said, you say you read a lot of fiction. Best fiction book you've read in the last year?
I reread. Speaking of reread, I reread The Canticle of Leibowitz.
No idea about that.
And I had read that in high school or in college and did not appreciate it. And so,
who's that by?
I think the last name is Miller. I'm not positive.
Huh. What's it about?
It's a dystopian novel, science fiction novel written, I think, in 1959. And it's about, there's a nuclear war, and the rebellion by the survivors is against the intelligentsia because they enabled the war.
Okay.
And so they destroy all technology, and they're against knowledge and learning because that will enable us to make weapons of mass destruction, will kill everybody. And so there's this strange dystopian thing, and then the monks preserve knowledge.
Oh, interesting.
It's really interesting. So it's kind of like a Middle Ages parallel, and so it's got a lot of philosophical and religious depth to it.
Is the style Fahrenheit 454? That's the wrong number?
But yeah.
Or is it more modern? Because that book reads a little older. C.S. Lewis sci-fi stuff is still kind of it's got this weird edge to it that's very pre-'80s. I don't know how to describe it. Writing shifted with TV significantly.
Yeah, no, it's old. It's 59, and I mean, I think in some ways that's a better writing, but it certainly shows his imagination of technology.
Yeah.
The things. It's hilarious to see how we've actually surpassed their fantasies in some ways with like phones.
Yeah, sure.
But then other things, of course, like interstellar travel's nowhere
Right.
near. So.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. That's a great answer. Who is your, speaking of Thanos, right? Who is your favorite fictional antagonist?
Well, I love anything with Nazis.
Okay.
They're so evil.
bad guys.
It's great to, yeah.
What is the best tool you have purchased for your day-to-day life? It's probably the journal.
Probably the journal.
Answer it for you, but
Yeah, it's probably the journal because
Yeah.
I don't really, other tools, I don't really.
Yeah.
I think I was with you when you were saying about the computer. I don't use the computer for planning.
Okay.
Or for tracking stuff.
In again, 5 sentences. What's the first 60 minutes of your day look like? Or to ask it differently, what's on autopilot in the morning? Well, what's your pattern?
Well, I have some. These days, I exercise a lot. So some mornings I get up early and go to the gym. Sometimes I do that later in the day. If I come to work, it's planning. I mean, it's coffee, of course.
Yeah.
And it's planning the day, making sure this to-do list is set. And then I will do kind of the get things done thing. So I'll spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes, laying out what the day is going to be, looking at the calendar. And then I will generally do the fastest stuff first. I should probably do the frog stuff first.
I was just going to say, it wasn't the
know.
frog.
Well, I don't want to do the frog. That's why.
Yeah, amen to that. What corner of theology are you currently obsessed with? And I mean corner, dusty corner.
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm still, I sort of can't overcome this concern and about law and gospel and how that plays out, but that's not really a dusty corner.
Well, it might be.
Maybe it is. I don't know. This whole idea of it was funny that you when you asked me to do this, I had just given a lecture. I'd covered Freeze's pastoral class, and I am maybe the dusty corner, at least in our circles, that I'm interested in, which you didn't talk about, is actually leadership, because that is kind of, the other side is they're all about leadership.
Yep.
And the role of pastor's wife. And we rejected all of that wrongly to our detriment. So I am interested in, how do we actually inspire people to do things? How do we help them do things? And, what is the role of the pastor's wife? Because it's insane to say, don't tell me there's no such thing. That's stupid. It just isn't real. If you're the wife of the congressman, you have a role. If you're the wife of a policeman, everybody is defined by his spouse. We're not feminists. Yeah. And so the pastor's wife is a real role and a real thing. Now that could be easily abused.
Sure.
And we've seen it be abused. But it's also an abuse to say she's just a member of the congregation.
Yeah.
So, how does that all function and work? It's not, I don't know if that's not really quite theology, but it's related again to vocation and a deeper understanding of what it is to serve your neighbor and how we're defined by our relationships. So
I think natural law is theology, and the overlap there I don't think is too far off. And I totally am with you that for whatever reason in the worship wars we lost productivity. We gave those guys came along and wanted to be charismatics with their guitars, and then they said the word leadership and mission a few times, and we stopped talking about mission, and we stopped trying to understand what leadership was. And I'm going to take a pot shot because they're probably not listening. They don't know what they're talking about when they talk about leadership. They haven't actually read the real books. They've read all this Christian nonsense garbage from the Zondervan, and the actual Good to Great. When I read Good to Great and then recently How the Mighty Fall by Jim Collins, I can't tell you how much he diagnoses the Kishnik era of exactly what was happening. We were doing everything we shouldn't have done according to the leadership books. Forget the theology. Oh man, anyway. Kishnik, I'm sorry if you're listening. I don't hate you. If you could lead a 2-week boot camp for young men the summer before college, what would it look like?
It would be almost all physical, and I think it would be heavy into exercise and sport, but it would be competitive sport because I think that, but not sport for. The problem is the way that we do sport in America is we've made sport into a good of itself.
Yeah.
And I think for masculinity, what the problem is what we're lacking is a true kind of competitive fighting spirit that also supports teamwork. And the sports that we do are too tribal, I think, is the problem.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So it doesn't actually support masculinity. It actually becomes a kind of femininity. Because it's about I don't know if I'm even, I don't have a fully articulated
I think it's curious what you're saying.
Yeah, so I want to, in my fantasy world, I'd set up a kind of Spartan sort of system.
Sure, okay. Yeah. One of the best things St. Louis Seminary did was had a functioning intramural program where the teams were so broad that you didn't even all play on the same team. You had major team sports, you had individual stuff, but all piled into these 8 teams. And I mean, the bonds I formed there have endured theological disagreements that we have to this day. I mean, it's really something.
Well, and we have a masculinity crisis.
Yes.
So I mean, these boys are being feminized, and so I guess if maybe I don't know what that's what I would want the camp to do.
Yeah.
Is teach men how to be men. And in my mind, because this is my background, I always go to kind of a militaristic.
Yeah, I like it. What is the most important failure in your life?
I don't think I can talk about my most important
Okay.
failures
Okay,
on the.
that's fine.
But
The one that has been the most significant in helping you.
the most significant in helping me. Well, my life, of course, like everybody's, is full of regret. I think professionally, the thing that I come back to all the time, and I'm so ashamed of, is that my early years in the ministry, I was so hard on my circuit brothers. And I came out of seminary with so much, fervor and zeal, which I don't think was wrong, and I think could have been good, and in some ways maybe was. But I was harder on those men than was in any way fair, and I didn't look at them with sympathy or with any kind of reverence for their age and so forth. And I just regret that. They, God be praised, were nice to me because they recognized, they'd seen my kind of animal before.
Right.
And so, it worked out fine, and they were nice to me and over time. But when I look back at that, I just think, I can't believe I acted like that.
Yeah. Makes me think of Luther's quip about zeal. Zeal without knowledge is fire without light. Knowledge without zeal is light without fire. You got to be somewhere in the middle. You want fire and light.
Yeah. Well, I think, we have to learn. And I like what you said about the bond that can go beyond theological differences. And, we have to learn to be, again, this is part of masculinity, to be a brother. You can punch your brother.
Yeah. Yeah. You're still brothers.
But you're still brothers.
Yeah. So, this is not time for this at all, but the circuit conference and the attempt to make that a formation place for brotherhood, and how it doesn't do that, it is not there to be that. What's your favorite Bible verse?
That's like asking your favorite hymn, whatever one I'm reading.
Okay, that's a good answer. What's your favorite non-Bible quote?
The perfect is the enemy of the good.
Okay, yeah.
That's the most important philosophical reality for productivity and for life.
Well, then speak about it for a minute.
Well, it just affects everything. The perfect's the enemy of the good. We are. Get back to grit. This is how you develop grit, and I see this in marriage all the time. The problem is that we're not accepting of our wives because they're not perfect, and it's ridiculous. We got to take what we're given and rejoice in it and see what's good and is before us, and not wait or pine, which is just coveting, for something better. I see this with young men that are delaying marriage. I see this with young people choosing colleges and careers. And I see it with pastors that, you can't write a sermon because it's not good enough. You just got to do it.
Yeah.
It's back to get to those, your 200 words.
Tim Ferriss's line that is the same idea, I think, is you got to let the small bad things happen to do the great good things. And 90% is usually more than enough. Two more. What major idea have you changed your mind about in the last few years, and why?
Well, this whole third use of the law thing,
okay.
And sanctification. That's a huge. I was certainly came out of the seminary and for a lot of years preached very much like Gerhard Forde.
Okay.
And very much law gospel stuff. And I really think now, not that it was heretical what I was doing, but it was shallow.
Okay.
And my sermons are not as popular as they used to be, but they've changed. They've become much more didactic. And I think that that's what they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
That's what the confessions mean when they say teaching.
Yeah.
So this whole change from the gospel, that preaching is performative speech.
Yes. Yeah.
Which has its place.
Yeah.
But shifting from that being the sole purpose of a sermon to a broader understanding, it was a big change for me.
Yeah. You got to have some rhetoric in your training, but that this is this spiritual monologue I give for 15 minutes to try to entertain you and make you feel loved, as opposed to the didactic. That's where I've just been so on the didactic train.
Yeah, and I think for me it was a kind of an existential. I have to create this spiritual crisis in people with the law, now they can have this wonderful gospel moment, and
what's gotten me about that is then I'm no longer actually preaching the word of God.
That's right.
I'm preaching my own words, and I'm trying to be God. And it's just such, I pin that not on Ferde so much as Kammerer. I think that's in Kammerer's stuff.
So David Schmidt wrote a great article about about Kemmerer, defending it and saying that everybody gets Kemmerer wrong. It's worth reading. I think he makes a really and he says the problem is Kemmerer is addressing an audience that was trained in rhetoric. And now we don't have any of that training, so we don't understand what he's saying.
Well, then I won't lay it at Kemmerer's actual feet. I'll lay it at his ghost. Because it's the ghost of... I also think it's homiletics as a discipline, and Schmidt probably wouldn't like this. I think it doesn't belong in the church as a discipline. We have exegesis and we have systematics. That is preaching. It should be. And if it's not doing us any good. It should be I read what the Bible says and I communicate it in a way that you understand it. That's the line between exegesis and systematics, and I'm doing that for you week in, week out. Homiletics comes out of Methodist thinking about. I even think revivalists, and I haven't done the scholastic legwork to tie the dots together, but the revivalist mindset. I've got to move this community. I've got to stand up here and provide this sort of structured. Again, rhetoric's the wrong word, but structured thing in order to entertain you and bring and that mentality and that study of the sermon as thing apart from Word of God, I just think it's been a black hole for us. It's taken us all in the wrong direction.
Oh, I think you're 100% wrong.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think that actually this is a necessary discipline. But I mean, that's a whole long other topic. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I think you are misunderstanding. You're responding to a kind of popular Protestant understanding of homiletics, which admittedly has invaded us. But, we have Gerhardt writes, here's the steps to writing a sermon, and here's what a sermon ought to contain. So, I mean, there's a history that is much older than this stuff. And not only Gerhardt, but we have this in patristic literature even a little bit. So there's more to it than that. And I think ideally, it is actually an understanding of what is the Word of God and how is the Word of God communicated. And it's not that, it's kind of parallel to your productivity stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, in that we do need to bring in some secular knowledge, or whatever.
Right.
But
anyway.
mentioned
You do need to have an understanding of rhetoric.
Yeah, persuasive speech and all sorts of things.
Maybe what I mean is then that the school or the discipline as it now stands, I think, is foreign. It's a foreign appendage. Not that the idea of studying preaching is a bad idea, but I don't think that's what it is anymore. At least, and I'm getting this from my education, right?
Right.
And what was presented to me, which did more damage to my ability to be in the pulpit.
You're picking on something here I care about. So I don't. But the other thing is, I think the problem is that we read these homiletics books when we're at seminary before we're ready for them. And really, if you haven't read a homiletics book in the last 10 years, I say shame on you, Jonathan.
Okay.
Yeah. Because this is our craft, and you ought to care about it.
Okay.
And the field of homiletics is the academic field of homiletics is different than the Zondervan Book of the Week.
Okay.
So I think there's more there than we realize, and I think we're dismissive of it for many reasons. But one of them is the way we're introduced to it at seminary, I think, is not ideal. And the other thing so the problem is we're reading this stuff like Kemmerer before we can understand it.
Right.
And then we make it makes an impression that's not accurate. The other thing I think, just related to this, I know I'm sorry we're long.
No, I'm just making sure that we have power.
The other thing is that I think that what homiletics ought to be more focused on, even though I like the discipline of homiletics, but I think it ought to be more focused on actually studying sermons and less on public speech.
Okay.
I would like to see in my fantasy world what we would teach homiletics, first of all, by teaching people to imitate, instead of just saying, here's how you write a sermon, now write a sermon out of your own brain and so forth. But that we would actually imitate preaching, as a way to grow into it. Yeah. But anyway, that was a long...
No, that's good. And I like being disagreed with, even though it's never pleasant, but it's good for you.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
So that's good. I don't know that I've read The Preached God was very helpful, even though that probably is not a homiletics book. But
well, I mean, it's in the realm.
And then Why Johnny Can't Preach, I found very helpful. But it's not really... I wouldn't put those as homiletics books, but they they were helpful.
I would. I think. I mean, it's not Buttrick's homiletic or Lowry's. But it's. I think that's in the realm. At least you're studying and concerned about the art of preaching and
very
so
much
forth.
so.
So that's
very
good.
much so. I have this bug in my bonnet about scholasticism, and that's probably half of my problem. And we could have a great conversation about that, I'm sure, as well. You probably have already answered this, but what is the most important first article truth you see most people, and I don't mean pastors, most people ignoring? It doesn't have to be parishioners either. It can be the American world. Most important first article truth we need to rediscover.
That society is built upon the family.
Okay.
The family is everything.
Yeah. Which makes me want to ask you again about, so what is a congregation structure that looks like or is built to be a family dynamic but remains a nonprofit organization? That is a fascinating thought.
There's got to be a parallel reality. I mean, because sometimes the matriarch or the patriarch's not even on the council, but you wouldn't dare ignore this, right? So, I mean, I think there has to be kind of a parallel thing going on. Sometimes they hopefully do overlap, but I think you kind of got both things.
Shouldn't the pastor be the patriarch at a certain point? And this is where it's like you got to endure, but isn't that kind of the idea?
I don't know. I mean, it depends what role the patriarch is forming. I mean, the pastor is, of course, it is a patriarchal position, but it's also it's such a didactic position. You're kind of the local philosopher.
Yeah.
And ethical guide, So like you said earlier, the seminary didn't tell you that some of the people will hate you. It's a little more, that's right, some of the people will hate you. A lot more of the people will just be intimidated by you. And they won't want to come to you because they're afraid of what you're going to tell them. And they don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
As Scare gave this great, right? I won't go to the doctor because whoever goes to the doctor they find out they're sick.
Right.
So, I mean, you're already sick. But the problem is they want to pretend like they're not. And so there's this weird kind of thing that I think often the pastor might be the patriarch, maybe, but I don't think he has to be.
Okay.
I think he can kind of serve as the village wise man,
right.
That he's there to guide the decisions.
Isn't that what a father should be, right? And so, like, this gets to, like, why is the father not the philosopher of the house and so forth? But then that doesn't necessarily make him a good leader. There's so much more. Perhaps we'll do this again.
Yeah, sure.
I really have enjoyed this conversation. Again, Pastor David Petersen, pastor at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And your most recent book, I think, that was released is it the Advent and Epiphany sermons, or was it the Lent and Easter sermons? Thy Kingdom Come, Lent and Easter sermons?
I don't remember which one.
Like
it's been a while. They're both pretty old.
I thought they just both came out.
No, they've both been out for probably 5-6 years.
Well, you probably would rather point people to Goddess Needs,
I would.
The Journal of Lutheran Liturgy. You ever get tired of being the liturgy guy?
It is funny. Yes, I don't even. So it's funny. I don't do it quite as much as I used to, but I used to have to really field a lot of liturgical questions and rubrical questions. And the funny thing is, I don't actually care that much about that stuff. I mean, I do. I don't mean. So that's probably overstating it.
No,
but
I get it.
It's just what we do, and we just do it. And I'm just happy to do it. I don't spend my time reading old rubrical manuals. I mean, there's people that do, and God be praised.
I just assume that's all you did all day.
Yeah, I don't care. I mean, so I actually, that's just
studying
not
flavors of incense.
That's right, yeah. Right. So whenever I have a question, I would just call Mark Braden at Zion in Detroit, and I just do whatever he tells me, because I just don't want to do all that work. So the thing I really like actually is homiletics, is preaching, but I know I'm kind of do have to sometimes be the liturgical guy.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Was that worth $1? What about $5? Project Resurrection is made possible by listeners like you and your patronage of my husband's work. Click the Patreon link in the show notes to sign up. Pretty please?